Hello and welcome. Today we have Robbie Kelman-Baxter, founder of Peninsula Strategies, a management consulting firm, as well as author. In fact, she's supreme believer in subscription payments. Her new book, The Forever Transaction, How to Build a Subscription Model So Compelling Your Customers Will Never Want to Leave, was released in April, and she's been going on and on about this for years. Welcome, Robbie.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, Jack.
Okay, great stuff, because I think this is really important. And we're going to be talking about how subscription models, recurring payments, can create new business models. And we're going to be discussing why subscriptions are so popular and what subscriptions can do for your organization. Now, your first slide is just so impressive. This slide just is everything from B2B to B2C, everything. Talk us through a few key examples here, because this reflects what's going on worldwide.
Yeah, I really wanted to open with this because it's so important to understand how prevalent subscription models are right now. 5 years ago when I wrote my first book, The Membership Economy, I still had to explain to people the power of subscription pricing and why it could work so well for almost any organization that was building long-term relationships with their customers. 5 years later, people are getting it, and they're seeing that subscription works for very, very small businesses, solopreneurs, nail salons, my local bookstore, Kepler's, in the lower right-hand corner, has a membership model with subscription pricing. But it's also, the largest companies in the world are also using subscription. Subscription works for B2B companies and B2C companies. So you see on here, not just the ones that you might think of, the Oracles, the Salesforce, the software as a service kinds of businesses, but also Caterpillar, the heavy equipment company, is building subscriptions around their heavy equipment, and even talking about a future where you don't buy your crane, you subscribe to your crane, you access it for the value that it creates for you and pay for it in that way rather than paying to have the responsibility of ownership. Another one I wanted to point out is Carbon 3D. That's a company located near me here in Silicon Valley in California in the United States. They make 3D printers, and you can't buy them. You have to subscribe to them. And the reason that they created their 3D printers that way is to allow them to share best practices, to ensure that all of the equipment is working well, and to remove the burden of ownership on their customers. So they're flipping the model on its head by focusing on the goal of the customer and saying, the customer doesn't want to own equipment. They want to achieve results. They want to manufacture the products they want to make. They want to, create big construction projects if they're Caterpillar. And to the extent that organizations can align the goals of the company with the goals of their customers and charge accordingly, they're going to build tighter and more disruption-proof and more valuable relationships with the people they serve.
And that's exactly right. It's the new relationship and the new types of revenue. I mean, that we're now getting subscription recurring revenues. How are they viewed in the market?
Yeah, so people love, corporates, companies, organizations love subscription pricing. And the reason is, well, first of all, predictability of cash flow. I don't have to tell this audience about how valuable that is. But also, businesses that generate subscription revenue are valued more highly, sometimes 5 to 7x in the public markets. So they're considered more valuable businesses because of that predictable revenue. Also, predictable revenue is usually tied into a different way of designing the product that allows the organization to more closely track the way customers are using your products and services, which creates tremendous data that allows the product teams to stay in front of the customers and continue to be at the kind of the cutting edge of what the next new features need to be or what the next new products need to be. It's like having your own research department with your own customers. So there's value there as well. One thing that I've been seeing more recently is some of the parts valuations, where organizations are trying to move as much of their business toward a subscription model as possible, because each part of their organization is being valued separately. It's just that important.
Okay, and the other thing that is critically important is, why now? Has COVID-19, the pandemic, made a difference to the attitude to the subscription model?
Yeah, it's such a good question, Jack. There's sort of two why nows. There's why now in the broad sense, the kind of pre-COVID why now, which is that there are finally technologies available that support subscription pricing. So it's very easy. It's much easier to implement it. And both consumers and business organizations are more receptive globally to subscription pricing. So that's creating a great environment for organizations to experiment with subscription. That's kind of the general picture. But in this specific moment around COVID, what we're seeing is that subscription businesses are proving to be much more resilient than other business models. There's lots of reasons for that. Subscription models, by their very definition, are based on building an ongoing habit with their customers. So once those customers have a habit of working with you, they're less likely to leave. And they don't have to proactively make a decision to come back to you. It's something that's already built in. So Zuora, the subscription billing company, just came out with more data that shows that through the period of May 31st of 2020, fully 80% of the subscription businesses on their platform reported member growth over this period. So that's not just staying flat, that's an increase in total number of subscribers, 80%.
And that's exactly how a lot of small businesses as well as large businesses are trying to have to react. Can we just move now to the, as you call it, the phases of maturity for subscriptions? Because this also brings another element of understanding of what's going on.
Yeah. So again, 5 years ago, when I would tell somebody that I believed subscriptions were the future, that any organization could do it, look at the benefits that an organization can enjoy by moving to this approach, people were scratching their head. They said, this is not relevant to me. I make heavy equipment. I sell to businesses. I'm a bank. I'm a manufacturer. This is not relevant to me. 5 years later, right now, what I hear when I tell people that I am a subscription expert is the specific challenges they're facing. Almost every organization in the world of all sizes and all organizational structures, nonprofit, for-profit, public, private, big, small, venture-backed, you name it, bootstrapped, they're all experimenting with subscriptions. And I'm pretty sure that if you looked in your organization, you'd see pockets of either, subscription activities, direct to consumer with recurring revenue activities, or membership models where you're trying to build deeper ongoing relationships with the people that your organization serves. And what I have spent the last couple of years really digging into is, what are the challenges and the best practices at each phase. So the first phase is for organizations.
Before you go any further, can I just ask, is there a variation around the world in terms of developing countries as opposed to developed countries to Scandinavia? Is there a difference in the pattern of development?
Yes, it's such a good question. Again, 5 years ago when I wrote my first book, it was hard for me to find examples other than newspapers and media companies outside of the United States, the UK, that I could really talk about. And in fact, early in my career, I worked with Netflix, 2001 to 2003. And during that period, they actually, went to the UK and found that there wasn't enough receptivity to this kind of new model of subscription, digital, the whole approach. Today, this is, truly a global phenomenon, number one. The companies that are kind of deep into subscription are in every market in the world. You can subscribe to Netflix or Spotify. You can access your, any newspaper you want from anywhere in the world that you want. So it is a global phenomenon. And what we're seeing now is local organizations really digging in and building out their own subscription models. So, that's kind of one big thing we're seeing. There are some differences. So, for example, I've been following the news industry. I work pretty closely with several news organizations. And here in the US, we use free a lot more than in Europe, as an example. Other markets, for example, in India, doing a lot more advertising, moving to subscriptions. So there are sort of different cultural norms and different tactics that work. But what is global and what I think is really important is that the concept of building subscriptions is based on the promise that an organization is making to the customers they serve, that they're going to be committed to solving the problem of that customer for the long term, or helping the customer achieve an important goal for the long term, and then building services and pricing around that promise. That's global.
So if we go through the stages now, starting with launch, and for me, that seems to me the biggest problem of overcoming the prejudices against subscription payments and recurring payments, because we've never done it like that before. How do you overcome those sort of biases, attitudes?
Yeah, so it's a big problem. Culture is probably the biggest thing that holds organizations back. And so, in that early phase, what I recommend is for organizations to experiment with subscription. I always say off in the corner. Almost, create a little skunk works, create a little initiative that is not responsible for revenue in the same way, doesn't have to answer to the same metrics as the rest of the organization, and is being
important
judged.
Is the metrics. So
yes,
the key point there you're making is that the metrics for these, not just skunk works, but new ways of doing business. What are the differences in the metrics?
Yeah, so in a transactional business, you're always talking about, well, first of all, there's a focus on revenue at the expense of all of the underlying health metrics. So, quarterly capitalism, hitting your number this quarter certainly is important, but a lot of times organizations will hit the quarterly number by, pushing promotions or bringing people in as customers who are going to leave and never come back, rather than focusing on building healthy recurring revenue relationships with the best customers. So in, subscriptions, in addition to tracking acquisition, you want to track engagement and retention. Retention, people pay lip service to retention, but when you look at sort of corporate reports, they always talk about the new customers, the big new customers signed, as opposed to the engagement and loyalty and expansion of relationships with longtime customers. So that really has to change. And in order to be able to anticipate the lifetime value of a customer, you really need to understand engagement. How does a new customer onboard, use your products and services, and what are the early indicators that they're either going to be a very valuable customer or a not valuable customer, and what are the remedies that you can implement to kind of right a relationship that is not going down the best path. So those are some of the metrics. Unit economics are also really important. So tracking what is the lifetime value of each individual customer, rather than just looking at a slice in time of how much revenue came in this quarter.
This really is a new business model. It's a new way of looking at the business, isn't it? It isn't just moving to transactional, repeated transactions to one customer, but a new way of developing the relationship and retaining the relationship. Okay, let's move on and look at this, how you scale up from your, as you call it, the skunk works, to much bigger, high volume stuff.
Yeah. So this is where the organization needs to be educated on, as you said, Jack, the changes, and that this is truly a different business model. A lot of organizations think of subscription just as subscription is a pricing decision. And usually it's marketing that makes pricing decisions. And so it's sort of seen as a marketing tactic. You know, go put subscription pricing on our existing products and we'll sell it in the same way and it'll be an add-on. But really, for this model to work, you have to understand the impact it has on products. So your products have to be designed differently. And also what it's going to do to your revenue. You know, in many cases, you know, we talk about, you know, the J curve, you know, your costs go up, your revenues go down when you move to subscription until it hits that point where the two cross again and, you know, that recurring engine really kicks in. So the finance team needs to really understand what to expect when an organization is moving, you know, big sums of revenue towards this new model. When you move a customer who's used to paying one time to own something, and now they're subscribing, the revenue is going to come in differently. And the organization needs to be prepared for that and needs to educate their investors to be prepared for that.
So then you go on to stage 3 where you call it lead, but that must involve slightly different things.
Yeah, so the middle stage, the scale phase, is really about organizational transformation. So, you know, in the launch phase, you are testing and experimenting and proving that you have something that could work. And then at some point, leadership says, wow, that is powerful, and that's the direction we want to move in. Let's put it across the whole organization. And that's the scale phase. And then the organization starts to kind of move to steady state. We are a subscription organization. We understand we're focused on the long term. We treat our customers like members, all of that good stuff. A lot of times what happens is the organization stops looking out on the horizon. They become so focused on the microscope of looking at their current members and the engagement of those members and the value of those members that they stop looking at what is happening in the world. What are the new technologies? What are the new competitors? What choices do prospective customers or subscribers have? And is this offering still relevant? It's really important. You know, the challenge is you have a membership model. Somebody signs up and they stop looking for alternatives and they just use your products and services without considering other choices. It can lull you into a feeling that your products and services are so good that they don't need to change. But you don't want to confuse inertia with loyalty. And you need to always be sure that what you're offering today to a new prospect is appealing enough for them to join, in addition to having something that is attractive enough to keep the people that are already there. So
you sound just like a working capital a consultant who's trying to G up the working capital improvement campaign and say, don't flag, let's do something else. Well, do you have the same sort of thing with, you call it subscription fatigue? Do you have the sort of thing of you change the team, you get new innovation and you try and energize the campaign again? And the other question I've got is, not everything can go subscription. And how do you manage subscription revenues at the same time as you're still doing one-off purchases? Because, I mean, you can't take a subscription for £100 million scanner, or maybe you can, but it's how you do the combination of both the old and the new.
Yeah, so a lot of really good questions. So first of all, what can and can't be a subscription? So you said, you know, £100 million scanner can't be a subscription. Well, that's an open question because there's a lot of responsibility when you own that kind of a machine that is so sophisticated and so finicky, so particular, needs to be well cared for, the purchaser, the owner, now has responsibility for taking care of it, first of all, and for keeping it up and running. And also, the minute that they buy it, it's no longer the latest thing. One of the really interesting things about Carbon 3D and the way that they build, this is again the subscription 3D printing company, is that they think of their product as software wrapped in metal, as opposed to, manufacturing, the physical product first. And they're constantly sending updates to continue to make the product as useful as possible, so that in their mind, the customer always has the latest version. So what you want from a subscription is, to align with what that customer wants, which is, I want this thing that will always give me this information so that I can make the best decisions in my work. So how do you provide that? So that's kind of the mindset of any subscription offering. And in many cases, you do have, as you pointed out, two different business models running side by side. So an example of this is Electronic Arts, the video game company. You can buy a game, boxed software, play it, the whole thing, $60 or so, and then you can also subscribe. So it's so for a little less than the cost of 2 games, you can subscribe for the year to have access to a whole catalog of games. And so, what people are, of course, worried about is, are the people that buy 2 games normally going to be the only ones that subscribe? So will there be cannibalization? Or are these different people? Some people like to own the games and some people like to subscribe to the games. Or is subscribing to the games going to deepen the relationship of people and then drive them to also buy the games that they love the most? So thinking about the role that subscription is going to play in your larger business model is really important. Is this a marketing tool or a relationship building tool? Or is this your main driver of revenue?
That's a wonderful way of bringing that together. So if we move on and look at the overall framework, what levers are most important in optimizing the subscription model, given the fact that we accepted that some businesses will not go the subscription road? So talk us through these types of areas, really.
Yeah, well, I wanted to also just point out, when I started working on this, people always ask me, what doesn't lend itself to subscription? And what I say is, if you have an advantage that means that you don't have to have a relationship with your customers because your customer has no choice, you don't need to have a membership mindset. You don't need to focus on the long-term well-being of your customer. You don't need to align the way that you generate your revenue with the way that they receive value. So if you have a patent advantage, if you have, the medicine that I need to stay alive, or the only device that does a particular task in a surgery, if you're the last gas for, 200 kilometers, if you're selling a commodity at a marketplace for a fixed price.
Can I interrupt there? Because each of those examples you've just given, actually, their critical advantage can disappear. Like somebody could develop a gas station absolutely. 5 miles down the road. Somebody could develop a new technique and so on. So the ability to go to sleep, as it were, in business terms, is just not available today.
You're absolutely right. And that's what I keep finding myself coming back to. So for example, one of the examples that I used to use 15 years ago of a business that doesn't need to have subscription is the taxi cab industry, right? Because it's regulated by the government and entrepreneurs can't participate, right? It's, so you don't have to be nice to the customer. You don't have to have a clean cab. You don't have to, stop when someone flags you if you don't want to. And then Uber and Lyft and the other ride-sharing services found a way in because customers were so frustrated because they weren't being treated well. So there was this disruption from an unexpected place. So, obviously I'm a hammer, I am a subscription hammer, and sometimes I'm at risk of thinking that every organization could benefit from it. But I really do think that using subscription pricing forces the entire organization to focus on the long-term well-being of the people they serve, which results in closer relationships, predictable revenue, better research information, and of course, better valuations because investors understand this. What we're looking at, this circle slide, is really different steps, places where an organization can dig in to improve the closeness that they have to this model. The couple that I just want to point out, number one, organization. This is an organization-wide initiative, and the metrics that you use need to be shared by everybody. Retention, for example, is not just the problem of the customer support team. It's part of, retention is based on how the product is priced, but also how you're charged and how easy it is to pay and join and cancel, and the way the product is structured, the way the services are set up. So you want the metric of retention to be owned by everybody. You want the engagement metrics maybe to be owned by everybody. The other one I wanted to just point out is the role of free. Talking to people that spend a lot of time thinking about money, free can be used strategically, both as a free trial to give someone a taste of something when they don't understand what you're offering or when they don't believe that it's as good as you say. Those are the only reasons for a free trial. And freemium is a business model where some people, some customers, are getting value for free forever, while others are paying a subscription. And the two work together. The freemium subscribers are generating behaviors that will convert them to being paid subscribers, but they're also part of the value of the business itself through the content that they create, through the relationships, through the network effect. Also, you might be using freemium if your subscribers themselves are bringing in new subscribers. So there's a viral component where each new subscriber actually brings in their community. So I think that's important to think about when you're thinking about the pricing and concerned about giving things away. I would say explore free, explore the role that free can play in your business model, but always look for the return on that investment.
I'm not sure Merck would be giving away a free £100 million scanner, but I can see them giving away the first month free or something of the rental.
Well, they could give away the experience, but they could also give away, they could give away information, reports, ideas to help people understand where the world's going. They could host conferences to talk about it so that people start to understand and have the confidence to make those kinds of investments.
Not in it. Well, COVID, as long as it was a virtual conference, but yes.
Right. We are talking during this time when live conferences aren't happening.
But the other thing that overhangs the subscription business is that there is a feeling, and I've met it several times, that the technology is too different and too complicated for us to be able to move to that. Have there been people been worried about this, and how have they overcome it?
Yeah, it can seem overwhelming to make this transformation, but the payoff is really meaningful. So, I really think that the best thing to do is to find a place to experiment, to get all of the risks and concerns written down so that the team that's working on this can address them. I always say, write down, what's the compelling vision? If our organization moved to a membership mindset, here's all of the, this is what it would look like, and this is the value it would create. And then going back to the beginning and saying, what are the things we need to prove to build leverage and understanding across the organization so that we can continue to invest more broadly? And what are the risks and fears that have been brought up so that we can make sure that in our early experiments, we mitigate those risks? And those things will make it easier for the rest of the transformation to continue.
Yes, but the issue, I think, with the technology is not really the technology, it's the mindset, the thinking
Yes.
behind the fact that you always deliver a large crane or a large scanner or what have you. How do you change mindsets? That's my final question, I think.
Yeah, you saved the hardest one for last. Yeah, the technology questions are very left-brained, right? They're very analytical. It's not easy, but it's doable, step by step. But changing the hearts and minds of the organization is much more challenging. You need leadership to sponsor it and support it. You need a very strong project lead, somebody that's been with the organization a while and has the respect of, across the organization. And you need education so that people understand how this model works and how it's part of a much bigger trend. It's not just your organization, it's every organization that's moving this way, and what the payoffs are. And then also to be on the lookout for what I sort of think of as the passive aggressive resistance, which sometimes is driven by what I think of as good reasons. Like, I worry that if we move to this model, we're going to lose revenue and we're going to destroy our business. And I don't want to be part of that. Versus, hey, I run this department, I run sales for this product, and if we move to membership or to a subscription model where all the products are rolled up together, suddenly I'm not so important. And so I don't want to move to a new model where I'm not so important. So really understanding the individual impacts can also be really an effective way of driving change.
Well, that's definitely the phrase of this conversation. Passive-aggressive resistance. I love it. So if you bring all this together and you're talking to a corporate treasury department, corporate treasurer, or even a CFO, what's the most important thing you'd leave him with?
I think I would want to leave them with the understanding that subscriptions are everywhere, that they're everywhere because both consumers and B2B customers recognize that it's a more flexible and aligned business model for their needs, and that organizations can generate a lot of value and predictability and security and resilience by pursuing this model, but that making the model work in an organization, especially an organization that has historically been more transactional, really requires engagement across all of the functional areas.
Thank you. And my key takeaway is that changing mindsets is the biggest problem here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robbie. That's really good.
Good. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.